advantage of the opportunity. But right now is about right now.
The Plan B, Ohio State Buckeyes!
Give everything you got in your heart to this place.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Rushing the Field Emergency Podcast Edition. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we're here to break down, finally, the sanctions from the NCAA related to Michigan's advanced scouting scheme, aka the Connor Stalions scandal. Before we give you our takes on it, a quick rundown if anyone hasn't seen all of the penalties listed out. There's a piece of this that is related to recruiting violations. We're going to focus on everything related to Connor Stalions. 4 years of probation for Michigan, and then significant financial penalties. So there's a $50,000 fine plus 10% of the budget for the football program, and then a fine equivalent to the loss of postseason competition revenue sharing associated with the 2025 and 2026 season. So again, 2 years of postseason revenue. We're estimating this, and one of my sources at Michigan confirmed to say, like, it's okay to say maybe $20 million. That's what we're talking about. Significant fine, way more than the previous record, which was Tennessee, which was an $8 million fine for NCAA violations. Reduction in football official visits, and then recruiting communications, again, tied to some other rules that were violated. What's of note to us, of course, is a 10-year show cause for Jim Harbaugh, an 8-year show cause for Connor Stalions. If anyone tries to hire them during these show cause periods, they have to essentially go to the NCAA and say, here's why we think they're going to follow the NCAA rules. Here are the resources around them to ensure that they don't break rules again. And if you hired Stalions or Harbaugh, they will also be suspended for a full season for the first time. So that's trying to deter people from hiring people who have broken rules. Now, we don't expect Jim Harbaugh to come back to college anyway. He won his national championship for his alma mater. He's good in the NFL. Connor Stalions, the NCAA had a lot of critical things to say, I would say, about his lack of cooperation and his scheme, which we'll get to in a second. The last bit of information, Sharon Moore, the NCAA accepted Michigan's 2-game self-imposed suspension. My sources are still telling me it's going to be weeks 3 and 4. So that allows Sharon Moore to coach against his alma mater, Oklahoma, in week 2. And the NCAA added a 3rd game for his suspension, which will be the start of the 2026 season. So yes, it's very weird if it ends up being weeks 3 and 4 of this year and then week 1 of next year. I don't know how we got there, but that's what it's looking like right now for Sharon Moore. Joshua, 2 big takeaways. No postseason ban for Michigan and no wins vacated from the national championship season or the seasons before. So ultimately, to me, this reads as Michigan is getting penalized for Connor Stalions' cheating scheme with a pretty hefty financial fine.
Yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. And it was interesting reading parts of what the NCAA put out there in their report because the suggestion would have been for a multi-year postseason ban. And in the past, we had seen that. I played on a team that had a postseason ban for something that I was not a part of. And so I know what that feels like. I know how much it can hurt a program. We went undefeated that year, probably would have played in a national championship game. So I get what they're trying to do here, but it also feels like in this day and age, $20 million, not a small amount of money, but schools are so comfortable asking their boosters for money all the time to fill in cracks and gaps. For a school like Michigan that's highly capitalized, what is the incentive to not get caught cheating or to not cheat at all, right? Like in the past, it was, well, you'll blow up your program. We're going to hold you out of the postseason. We're going to take away scholarships. And now it's just like, we'll take some of your money, but people are fine going and finding money elsewhere. So I think the penalty certainly feels lighter than what happened. And I think folks will try to justify it that way. But if you read between the lines, 10-year show cause for Jim Harbaugh, 8-year show cause for Connor Stalions, the recommendation for a multi-year postseason ban, which they're not going to do. This was a huge deal. Like people, this was not something that was light, but in the changing times here, I understand how you get to the point where you say all those guys who are in the locker room right now, we're not going to make them suffer because of what happened a couple years ago.
And that's been a huge piece of criticism of NCAA punishments over the years, is that they would take so long to be litigated out. And then you would be punishing players who had absolutely nothing to deal with it, coaching staffs that had absolutely nothing to deal with it. So that's why this has shifted towards more individual show causes for like the adults in the room who should know better and who should know that they need to follow the rules, and also the financial penalties. And if people didn't realize this is where it was shifting, you should have, when Tennessee had their case with the like cash in the McDonald's bags and all of that, because there were like multiple times throughout that NCAA report was like, in any other case, this would have been a postseason ban. You had that language in the Michigan case as well. Like they're like, listen, repeat offender, aggravating circumstances, like this would be a postseason ban, but we did not want to punish the players on this team, especially for actions of people who aren't even in the program anymore. So honestly, it kind of benefited Michigan that like half the staff and everybody left for the NFL right after this case. There were elements of like, again, Connor Stalions not participating, like not at all, being difficult, not admitting to his own behavior when the NCAA had proof about different things.
A phone in a pond.
He did. That's how he got rid of some of his evidence. He threw his phone in the pond, which was a rumor, by the way, at the time. And now that it's fun that we know that now. Also the NCAA did confirm that Connor Stalions was the person who looked an awful lot like Connor Stalions at the Central Michigan game. Remember, we saw him on the sidelines. He was wearing CMU gear. They said that he attended that game in part to decipher the signs of Michigan State, but also to help CMU with their play calling. There was a lot of overlap on former Michigan staffs. But man, we spent a lot of time looking at that screenshot, didn't we, Joshua?
We did. And there's like this funny thought in the back of my mind that CMU might get hit a little bit harder for this situation than Michigan's getting hit right now.
So here's the thing. I fully understand why the NCAA has opted to go the route that it is, right? With these financial penalties, trying to punish the adults in the room. But your question earlier about like, what does this deter? What bad behavior does this address is a really valid one. It kind of goes back to and probably backs up the Big Ten's decision to intervene when they did, because now it kind of looks like the punishment there from Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, to keep Jim Harbaugh off the sidelines for Michigan's biggest games was actually the most significant penalty that they had.
No, I totally agree with that. It's a very interesting thing in the changing landscape. And I'll say this, like people have tried to find ways around rules since the existence of college football. Like this is not anything new. This is not unique to the University of Michigan that they would do something that was outside of the rules. But even though it was bad, the old way they used to punish, and it didn't feel like it was just in a lot of ways. It felt like it was just in the idea that it was a deterrent to breaking the rules in a way where it's outside of what everybody else is doing. So I'm curious, like, do coaches see an opportunity here, whatever the case is? Hopefully not. But I am happy that there are players in that locker room that won't have to sit out and not participate in potentially making a postseason run because people who aren't even in that program anymore aren't around. I felt that feeling, and it's tough.
Are you surprised that there's no wins vacated?
The vacating of wins it always felt hollow to me. Like we watch the games, we know what happened. And so like, you can't really take it back. I think in the changing times, it might be a little bit stronger and more symbolic since we're not going to do anything about the future of your program. We're going to look back in the past and we're going to completely acknowledge that like, these are not things that we're going to recognize. You didn't earn it. So I'm 50-50 on it. Like, it doesn't mean a ton to me because if it was my school, I'd just look back and be like, well, you all watched the games. You saw that we won. So vacate whatever you want to vacate. But I do think the symbolism of it feels a little bit stronger right now because of how they're punishing people.
I have always been anti-vacating as a punishment for the reason that you said. Like, we all saw it with our eyes. And I think it is weird for records. I get why they do that. We've seen it a lot of times for ineligible players. Yes. So that was one of the reasons I didn't think we were going to see it here, because although the punishment and this, like the scheme of the advanced scouting and the sign stealing, was very elaborate and everyone had a lot of questions about how exactly it worked, it wasn't necessarily playing ineligible players that people knew were ineligible. So you also had I was in the room with NCAA president Charlie Baker the day after Michigan won the national championship. I was at the NCAA convention, and he was defending the fact that they looped the Big Ten in and Michigan in once they got the information. And he was like, listen, I'm glad we did it. They took action. And we all think that what we watched Michigan win a national championship fair and square, which is what he said. So to me, that also boxes you in. You can't go against the NCAA president saying like, no, they won it fair and square because they removed the person who was potentially doing something against the rules. So I think that would have been a hard sell as well, to get rid of results that the NCAA president had kind of already said like that was fair. But again, I think fundamentally I'm against that as a penalty. And there's not great ones, right? Because of how slow this process moves.
That's the biggest issue.
So I don't know what else you could do that's like really significant outside of a postseason ban, which again, I think we all would have felt like was a little bit icky, especially if it's like, this analyst and his little network with a couple of people. He's an intern. He's got an athlete. He's got these people he's buying tickets for. I mean, there's probably so many players on that team that had no idea that anyone was using information that was obtained this way.
No doubt. And to touch on like the vacating wins in this situation, I think it would have been the point where Connor Stalions was off the staff. Like, you can't touch those games. And that includes the national championship. I always felt very strongly that they had to go out there and do what they did to win that title. And I never want to discredit a champion in that way, because I know how hard it is to win those games. But up until that point, I feel like there was an argument that you could have made. But then again, it is very weird. And for a lot of people, it doesn't mean a ton there. It would have felt really icky, like you said, to punish everybody who's there right now. But there's the quote that was in the report about the way that Harbaugh was running the program. And basically, like, there was a disregard for rules and compliance that makes things feel a little bit less icky. And this is on the heels of the recruiting violations and like all the different things that they had been through. Like, there were numerous investigations going on at the same time. And I do think it is very interesting for Jim Harbaugh, who is a guy who is very principled and he believes in his morals. And it's probably how you get to a place like this where you think some rules might be unjust or stupid, so you just don't follow them. But for a guy like that to have this quote, Harbaugh ran a program that was largely dismissive of rules compliance. There was little, if any, emphasis on following the rules. That, to me, is a harsh statement about the way you run a program.
Yeah. And just to underscore that, because this is a 74-page report, so I'm sure not everyone is going to go sift through all of it, but there is a large portion that talks about like the compliance officers and the way that the staff felt about them, very dismissive of them, very much like they were not on the same team. And when you look at all of the different types of rules violations, right, the COVID era recruiting violations in this case as well, there's a lot of different areas, to your point, where you can just imagine Jim Harbaugh being like, this stuff doesn't matter. And it's interesting to put that into perspective with everything else he like was outspoken about while he was a head coach, and rules like athlete compensation that he wanted to loosen and change. But I do think this is going to be part of the legacy. Multiple cases, because Michigan was a repeat offender. That's why the severity of some of these punishments was, in line with a postseason ban. And I do think, his lack of cooperation with the actual NCAA investigations is also noted throughout both of these cases.
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger thing. Like, to give a window into this, after Ohio State went through the Tatgate thing, the compliance department at Ohio State was like, it was impossible to do anything. And they were constantly in the building. I remember my dad gave me his car, and they basically wanted to do like forensic accounting to see where the money came from that my dad spent on this car. And like, that was how things were, because like they were so scared of getting in trouble again and having repeat offender status. And so I think from the NCAA perspective, when you're used to people being like uber cooperative after they get in trouble one time, to see a program that was basically like, yeah, no, we're still kind of going to do our own thing. And like, we got it figured out. And like, if we want to follow it, we'll follow it. I think that's where they're like, I don't know if we've ever seen anything quite like this after somebody already just got caught for something.
One of their arguments at one point in this was that they shouldn't count as repeat offenders because this all happened before they found out they were in trouble for the first one, like before that penalty came down, which the NCAA was like, no, that's not a case. That opens up a giant can of worms. We're not going to let you make that argument. That's part of the reason that Sharon Moore, by the way, got the suspension that he did. It's part of the reason Michigan self-imposed 2 games because they knew he would be deemed a repeat offender. He had that 1-game suspension from the previous COVID era recruiting violations case. His penalty stems from initially deleting a bunch of text messages when the news broke, and then he cooperated after the fact and showed up for the hearing and all of the things that he needed to do. So it's ultimately a 3-game suspension for him for like a very specific part of this. But, unsurprisingly, the committee was very harsh on Connor Stalions, who did not admit to a lot of the behavior that they found that he did. And they did not seem to enjoy at all that he did a Netflix special without cooperating with them and try to help them figure out exactly what happened. They brought that up multiple times. So that's a different way of not cooperating than we've ever seen before, doing your own Netflix special.
He is one of the more interesting characters that I have ever seen in sports. Like, I can't wait for one day when like John Bacon writes the book about Connor Stalions. Like, I'll be one of the first people to buy it on pre-sale. But yes, like I think a lot of this, and you mentioned the disparity in these financial sanctions versus the previous record. A lot of this is because of a lack of cooperation and a feeling like you don't have to go through the same processes that everybody else does when you're being investigated by the NCAA. And like, again, I said at the beginning, you can try to find money out there, but $20 million is not a small amount of money. So it's something that they're going to really have to figure out, especially in a rev share era.
Yeah, and it might ultimately be more than that. I've seen people estimate, up to $30 million as well, which, yes, it is a lot. And especially when you're now paying your athletes $20.5 million each year moving forward, that is a significant dollar figure. But ultimately, I think this is, even if Michigan appeals, even if we kind of rehash all of this when Sharon Moore is not on the sidelines, it feels like this is the end. Like, it feels like we have finally reached the end point of this saga, which was crazy. It was changing by the hour. The rumors were flying. The whole thing was unbelievable. And yet believable at the same time. We got some answers on exactly how it worked. We still don't know. Connor said that Michigan did not reimburse him for the cost of buying the tickets, sending people to games. There's still some unknowns out there.
Well, Joshua, he was doing like the vacuum repair, right? Like, he had the vacuum repair company.
Yeah, and he said he was selling a property he had in California.
Yeah, he had the whole deal.
But I think this is the end, right? Like, this is the finish line of this scandal, of this saga. I don't think Ohio State fans or Michigan State fans will believe that this is satisfactory. No. But it does feel like this is where college sports is. This is where the NCAA is in terms of like the teeth that it has in its penalties and what it was going to do in this case. And we can kind of move on now.
I would hope so. If I were Michigan, I think you appeal everything because you have the opportunity to, but like, I would feel pretty satisfied with the penalties that came down. Like, you just move forward as a program. Like, every opportunity you want is out there in front of you. And you figure that part out. I'm so chronically online. Like, I see the discourse between Michigan fans and Michigan State fans and Ohio State fans. And like, the one prevailing thing that I think is going to be the toughest for Ohio State fans to get over is like the Tatgate thing and how all of that went down versus what it is today. And like, NIL being a thing in like players doing all of what they're doing was already like a man. And we got the postseason ban. We had to get rid of Tress for this. And now you put this on top of it. It's going to be really interesting. I do think largely though, there is a feeling overwhelmingly in Big Ten land and probably throughout college football that we have the idea that Michigan cheated in this scenario and we're done with this. And like, people can do whatever they want with that information. But I think a lot of us are ready to move on from this.
Yeah, if some people want to view that national championship with an asterisk, that's fine. You're allowed to. Here is a 74-page document to make your case of those teams in the years prior as Michigan was, winning games and beating Ohio State for the first time in a while. But I think, again, I think most of college football can't believe that this lasted as long as it did. that it took years to get resolution here, especially after you did have in-season action by the Big Ten in the NCAA in unprecedented ways. So I think for the most part, yes, the fans of the rival schools are still going to be frustrated, still going to believe that Michigan should have been penalized more. Michigan fans are still going to argue about how much of an impact signs and sign stealing even have on a game. And then you're still going to have people like yourself. I've seen UConn fans, Louisville fans, people who got hammered by the NCAA for violations that seem kind of quaint in retrospect compared to what Michigan did and their defiance in it. And you're never going to square those things because It's a totally different era of college sports, the powers the schools have, the way they've handled these things, and just the teeth of the NCAA. And so I don't think everyone's going to be satisfied, except I think most Michigan fans are probably satisfied. But outside of that, you're never going to resolve some of this stuff.
You mentioned the teeth of the NCAA, and it's just like the biggest thing that's sitting here in my mind now. Like, what does having a ruling like this mean for them? Like their enforcement it's just different than what it used to be. We've both talked about the length of this investigation and how that impacts their ability to actually maneuver in putting down punishments. Like, to me, it feels like the NCAA and their purview over college football in particular is a suggestion in a lot of ways. And I want to know your thoughts on that.
I think that's a read that a lot of people probably share. I do think there's a lot of people that are trying to follow the rules and they believe in, as equal playing field as possible. Yes. But I think what you do when you maybe get caught, that has changed based on different outcomes than we've seen, or just the idea that, let's say it's $25 million. Is that worth it for Michigan's first national title in a quarter century? Probably.
I'd pay for it. I'd pay for
definitely.
It.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of that I think is just a change calculus. And I'll also add that now you have this new entity, the CSC, which is supposed to be in charge of NIL and rev share and all of that. They're going to be the ones enforcing those rules. So you're already entering a new chapter for the NCAA where maybe it's just not the same. An NCAA investigation is not going to be as heavy hitting if it's not really about NIL or rev share and the stuff that people really, really matter right now and what costs the most. So if you're going to have rules violations that are outside of that are, or looking at eligibility decisions, it's just not the same as the idea of a notice of allegations, an NCAA penalty coming down that it used to be. And this probably is an inflection point. I don't know that there would be, the level of anticipation or the potential for a really damaging ruling after this. It's hard to envision that. So that I think might be part of the legacy of this case, this scandal. And as you said, in the changing landscape, which is basically what they said for why they didn't do a postseason ban, because the world was literally changing. In between the 2 days of the hearing for the Michigan case in Indianapolis, the House settlement got approved.
Right.
That's as symbolic as you can possibly get for, okay, we can't do things the way that they used to be, and we have to do what we think is best. And that, in this case, was let's get a lot of money and let's make sure that Jim Harbaugh and Connor Stalions probably not going to work in college football. And that's where we are. Chapters closed on the Michigan Connor Stalions advanced scouting, sign stealing scandal, whatever you wanted to call it. That'll do it for this emergency episode of Rushing the Pod. Rushing the Pod. Oh, maybe we should call it that. Rushing the Field, the pod.
I'm kind of here for it.
Wow. Okay. Maybe we came onto something. All right. Rushing the Field emergency pod on the Michigan penalties from the NCAA. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. We'll be back with more regularly scheduled programming next week.